A very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. I think first of all, a big round of applause for the panel that just went by. A tremendous job done by all of them. I personally got to learn a lot, and a lot of it was, I think, very heavily focused in particular on sustainability, right? And that's where I'd like to begin my presentation, which is titled Comprehensive Facility Planning, which is fundamentally underpinned by sustainability, right? Before I get started, just a fun fact. How old do you think is sustainability as a concept? I would just love to hear the year from maybe 3 or 4 of you. 10 years old maybe? Anyone else? Sorry? Well, not that far behind, but any other answer which is there? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, would anyone have a point of view as to how old is sustainability as a concept? Or when did it really start becoming a big thing? Maybe 5 years, right? Okay. So the reality is that a lot of us believe that sustainability is linked to climate change, and because the climate is indeed changing, and because we are experiencing it in our day-to-day life, sustainability has become a big vogue on account of climate change, right? The truth is a little more complex. The actual year and month in which sustainability came to the global fore was actually October 1973. So the topic that I'm talking about, I think, is nearly half a century old, right? And I will tell you the trigger why it came to the fore in October 1973. For some of you who have had some interest in history, October 1973 was when a war took place in the Middle East called the Yom Kippur War, when the Egyptians wanted revenge for their loss in 1967 and along with the Arabs attacked the Israeli state. Because they did extremely well for the first 1 week, the Americans obviously tried to bail out Israel by shipping arms to Israel for its defense. And the Arabs responded by putting an oil embargo and a fossil fuel embargo on the entire Western world. The input cost of fossil fuels within 2 weeks went up by 4 times, right? So let me put it in a very specific context here. The light bill in this room suddenly cost 4 times more. The air conditioning in this room cost 4 times more. The heating required in this room cost 4 times more. The petrol that we all used in our cars this morning cost 4 times more. And that's where a lot of emphasis started to come towards how do we do essentially resource conservation by improving the efficiency of everything that we do. Whether it is the cars that we drive, whether it's the buildings that we operate, whether it's the cooling that we get, whether it's the heating that we get, whether it is the source of electricity that we use, right? So essentially, why did I bring this up at the beginning? I brought this up at the beginning because I wanted to make a point that if action needs to be taken, we don't need for something to be invented. This work has already been done more than 50 years ago and perfected thereon since. So the question is, what exactly do we mean by comprehensive facility planning? Now, out of the whole surge of, I would say, trying to become more sustainable, building owners, occupiers, and in turn facility managers started to think a lot more about how they could impact customer financials and how facility management as a discipline could actually be linked to the strategic financials of a company. And through about 20 odd years, which is over the 80s and the 90s, a product evolved in the United States, later very popularized in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and Hong Kong, which focused a lot on CFP or customer facility planning as an offering, right? So this again as a product has been established in developed markets for over 23 years, right? So it's a fairly well established concept. And given the fact that India is now at a stage where it has to optimize everything that is already built and make sure that it is much more efficient for things that it is building, it's a way of thinking that we believe is incredibly right for the Indian market. So essentially, right, I'm going to talk about only 4 things. One is the evolution of CFP, or what we call comprehensive facility planning, a little bit of a definition of what is comprehensive facility planning, a real case study that we had the pleasure of deploying at one of our customers in India to show how it truly works at a facility level, and what has that experience taught us with regards to the mandatory prerequisites for a concept like comprehensive facility planning to truly work. You know, whenever we deal with our clients, right, and I think these points were brought up in the last discussion that took place, we see what is called as a lot of, opposing ideas or a lot of opposing goals in what everyone says, right? Essentially, if we look at all of our customers, right, what is it that they want? They all turn around and tell us that we want clean facilities, healthy facilities, operationally productive facilities, energy efficient facilities, sustainable workplaces. They all talk about the fact that they want technology as a base case deployment so that they can move from manual to digital. And obviously all of them express a desire, right, towards reducing costs in operations, reducing cost of maintenance, reducing cost of energy, reducing cost of consumables. By and large, very, very good boilerplate intents. But the problem is that what they also want, it actually conflicts with the intent that they have. Lowest price qualified suppliers, right? The word qualified is very, very open and very, very subjective. So essentially it becomes lowest price suppliers. Year-on-year productivity and cost containment, right? For those of you that are on the building operations side, your management does not tell you how much more you want. They tell you how much less can you work with. Input-based contracting models, right, which have pretty much run its course because the level of productivity that you could get from price is now a thing of the past. OpEx models for facility improvements, right? A colleague of mine in the previous session talked about the fact that a lot of people turn around and say, we want to do things to reduce cost, but you put in the money, right? We are not putting in the money. And even for CapEx, right, the typical threshold that is given for most existing buildings is under 1.5 years, which means a lot of good projects that can have a 25-year benefit actually get destroyed at the stage of project conception itself. So essentially, when we deal with the larger facility ecosystem, we see that there seem to be a lot of opposable ideas. But at the same time, right, everyone wants to move into the future in top 3 areas, right? Whether it's a compliant and capable workforce. Today, if you really look at both the supplier and the client side, right, with the infrastructure being added in India, we need 1 million more people on the job. Where are they going to come from? Wage code readiness, right, moving from minimum to market and market to living. Ethical labor with being 100% compliance. Those of you that are on both the client and supplier side would have noticed a surge in what constitutes compliance and how do you drive compliance. People becoming multi-skilled, people becoming comfortable with technology, and people being aware of concepts that impact the workplace and the workforce. From a technology perspective, right, the reality is that everyone will now need to start driving 2x productivity of every person that's deployed at the site. Wages are going up 6 to 8% year on year. Costs have to be contained. Essentially, where you have 2 people, you will have to make do with 1 person. And how do you do that without investing in technology so that you get digital workflows, you can sense, measure, and control outcomes, and you have a digital reporting around the activities, around the costs, around the environment, around sustainability. Just to share a fun fact with you, we did a little study of, I think, close to 7,000 of our workforce using digital technologies to see what is the true utilization of a person in an 8-hour shift. Would anyone venture to guess what is the actual productivity of an unskilled or a semi-skilled person in an 8 to 9-hour shift? What percentage of the time is actually spent in work? I'll give the exact answer. 3 hours and 42 minutes in a 9-hour shift. Right? What is the rest of the cost? It is the cost of being there. Because it's a shift, I need a person. There's no tech. Right? And on the final side, sustainability, right, which is what I started with, it's a comprehensive conversation, right? You have to increase energy efficiency, but you also need to change the source from which you're getting your electrical energy. You need to look at electrification, particularly as assets become more and more disaggregated. You need to have the shift from fossil fuels. You need to drive internal behavior demand. And essentially, you also need to start getting much and more aware about how this links to ESG scores and ESG linkage. The biggest reason why ESG is becoming incredibly vogue, right, is, my own company comes from a private equity background. And today, all the private equity companies or all the money that's flowing into the country for investments has a very simple question. Is the asset that I'm investing into having an ESG compliance? Is it aligned to the ESG goals? Does it have an ESG plan, right? Is it a sustainable business? It's almost becoming a barrier for investment. So ESG is not just something which is a nice buzzword, but in reality it is something that is linked to the ability of companies to raise, deploy, and productively use the capital that's flowing around in the global environment. So in very simple terms, right, when we started to look at what was happening in the legacy approach, right, most of the clients were treating services as standalone. Even when it was integrated FM, it was the integrated PO, not necessarily integrated FM from a workflows perspective. There was very little thought towards how the output of one service can actually impact the input to another service, and how the two can actually optimize cost and get better outcomes. KPIs were always departmental, right? Finance has to reduce cost, HR has to reduce headcount, FM has to increase net promoter score, procurement has to always get L1, right? And we had a huge amount of, I would say, places where departments were meeting KPIs, but companies were missing the overall objective. There's a lot of emphasis on cost versus value. And everyone obviously is focused on the AOP cycle. So the way we looked at it very simply was, we said that rather than just looking at it as a bucket of manpower and optimization and so on and so forth, which is what we call a do-nothing approach, right? In the do-nothing approach, essentially all that somebody says is, can you give me a discount? Can you match L1? Can you become the lowest price? That approach has run its course. On pricing, this industry has bottomed out, which means do nothing is the black line. Your costs will continue to go up. They may, in fact, in many cases, rise even faster than your company's revenue. So we sort of turned around and said, let's use the power of technology and domain expertise, right, towards doing something very simple. Lowering manpower cost, energy cost, maintenance cost, and consumable cost as one composite number, right, and creating a profitability fund. By doing so, we got to a stage where we actually started to offset manpower cost inflation, which meant it became cheaper to run facilities rather than more expensive, right? DA increases were no longer mattering in the P&L of the company. And creating an OPEX fund for facility upgrades without resorting to fresh CapEx, right? So effectively, the CFP offering is tuned towards helping facility management professionals meet opposable goals. Now, while this sounds very fancy on paper and it sounds very logical on paper, the real question is, does it work? So I wanted to share an actual case study that we deployed in India, which was a hospital in North India, right? And when we sort of first started to do a little bit of voice of personas or a voice of various people that were getting impacted by facility services, the first department that we spoke to was engineering, and by extension some level of housekeeping as well. Now this was a hospital that was pretty old. The assets were legacy. They weren't getting environmental conditions for the comfort and hygiene on a consistent basis. The word consistent is very important because literally they had to put off surgeries because some AMC had lapsed, some OT was not operational, some procedure could not be performed. It was actually starting to impact the revenue, right? So the operations department said, I cannot guarantee what my client wants on a consistent manner, right? So then we turn around and go to finance, right? I think you spoke very rightly about finance and looping in finance, right? And finance essentially has a very simple thing. Board has asked us to spend less on OpEx. We have to increase EBITDA compared to our competitors. And by the way, while we have CapEx for revenue processes. We don't have it for building equipment and building upgrades, right? And when you go to HR, right? And forgive me, I'm using this word called non-compliant, right? Very often we meet people who say, I'm using this guy, he's not fully compliant. I'm happy to give it to you. I know you're fully compliant, but can you do it at the same rate? Right? For people who out here who are in sales, hand on heart, you do get this feedback, right? Essentially what he's saying is, can you take a cut on your margins, right? Not realizing that that's not how the whole thing works. So again, people wanted different things. It was a case of opposing pressures. So what did we actually do, right? So what we did at this particular case was, first we sort of worked out as to what was the real problem at hand, right? And the real problem at hand was that the gentleman had disaggregated and non-compliant manpower suppliers. There was zero use of technology for FM operations. I'm sorry, but everyone says tech, tech, tech. I am yet to see a lot of people actually use tech, right? And this is not a supplier issue. I think this is a supplier and a client issue where there's very little understanding of what we can truly do with tech. And there was no proactive strategy around asset management and energy management, right? So what we did with this client was, we actually began by migrating the entire resource base onto a compliance structure. It was about 674 personnel. This actually caused an increase in the cost because they were moved to a compliance structure. But because we use technology for doing real-time tracking of people, for doing real-time tracking of work, for optimizing work in line with the real needs that were there, we were actually able to reduce manpower cost by 16% in 1 quarter. The billing of this particular entity actually went down by 2.4 crores in the first year, simply by using technology towards freeing up excess resources. Technology also gave them the ability to monitor service, to hold suppliers accountable, and to also get to a situation where patients, doctors, and the entire ecosystem could feed in terms of how the performance was being delivered. So the interesting statistic, headcount went down, but net promoter score went up. And that clearly showed that the approach was working. And finally, from a sustainability perspective, we actually overhauled a lot of the utility systems that they were using on chiller, in terms of boiler retrofits, in terms of putting up a IoT system for measurement and verification, I think which my colleague from Siemens was talking about as a very nice platform. And essentially, they had a permanent cost avoidance, which will now reflect in their P&L of 80 lakh rupees a year. This number is expected to rise to 1.7 crores this year. It's the same for them as taking 1,500 cars off the road. And the way their journey went was exactly as per this graph, right? That they actually did everything that should cost more money, but they landed up in a situation where they're spending less money, right? And the way the walk went was very simple. The cost of compliance, bill went up. Fair wages, the bill went up. Tech optimization of count, the bill started to come down. Sustainability ventures, which were actually funded as part of the CFP program, the cost started to come down. Better asset management, the cost started to come down. So on an absolute basis, right, this is not on a percentage basis, they were running the facility at 20 rupees lesser than previous year. And obviously when you compare, obviously since their occupancy and revenue went up, the metrics on a percentage level look even better. So what this essentially taught us was that if we start looking at things in a much more holistic, in a much more integrated, and in a much more evolved kind of a manner, we would actually be in a situation where we can turn around and say, let's look at our baseline of expenditure and let's see how can we actually run something at 20 or 30% lesser, even though my company is growing, even though my headcount is growing, even though my revenue is growing, right? And that in essence is what CFP is all about. It's bringing together people optimization, energy optimization, consumables optimization, maintenance optimization in a guaranteed and a verifiable manner so that the absolute cost of running a facility significantly reduces, right? But our key learning, right, which is my final slide, is what does it take to make a program like this work, right? Because this is not a program of saying, can you give me a quotation? Or I am taking 3 quotes, or speak to my procurement manager. This is a very, very strategic conversation between two organizations, right? And the things that are needed for it to be successful, The first one, financial modeling. Unless the client and the provider are doing an integrated financial modeling of what they expect to see in their financial MIS and their board goals, right, this process will not work. So the way we work with our customers is we turn around and say, let's all be completely open book about this. You tell us where you are, let's discuss where we need to get to, and let's be very transparent about doing integrated financial modeling. The second part that we learned was there has to be mutual exclusive sponsorship. Unless the leadership teams at both sides, and I mean the business leadership teams, not necessarily just the admin leadership teams, are on the same page, you cannot do a strategic program like this. There has to be a buy-in at both ends. The third critical part, right, domain expertise. You have to know janitorial services as well as you know chiller algorithms, right? It is preferable if the party that you're dealing with has in-house skills. Not everyone can know everything, but you need to understand the domain. If you don't understand how money is spent, how will you save it, right? So you need to have those domain skills. The other domain skills that you need to have is you need to understand the client business and the client business drivers, right? So for example, if you go to a hospital, they will use words like average revenue per operating bed, average length of stay, and so on and so forth. Why is it important? How do your KPIs link to it? And basis that, how can you design a service program that is essentially linked to it? It has to be 100% digital. You can't drive a numerically outcome program on Excel sheets unless there is real-time data flowing in for all important KPIs, unless there is a single source of truth where the service provider and the client can log into the same system. Such a program does not work. And I think the most important feedback that I'd like to leave you with is that CFP is essentially a program. It is not a contract, right? Because what you're trying to achieve is a multi-year effect. What you're trying to achieve is a multi-year goal. What you're trying to do is linking to your company's financials. What you're trying to do is linking to your ESG commitments. So this is not something which is a 1 month or a 2 month or a 3 month contract. It is where everyone has their skin in the game for mutual success. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for patiently hearing me out. I'm available here all day, and I'm happy to take questions and interact with all of you over the next couple of hours, along with my team that's present. Thank you so much.